Argentina. It's a nation of fire and memory, a place really defined by these staggering highs and just devastating lows. So today, we're going to dive into how a country with such immense promise became a story of constant struggle, and how, through it all, its spirit just refuses to be broken. Let's get into it.
This quote, it just captures the soul of Argentina perfectly. It really is a story of incredible resilience, this constant cycle of, burning down and then rising right back up from the ashes. And that tension, that's the key to understanding the country's entire history.
And that brings us to the big question, right? The central question for this whole explainer. At the turn of the 20th century, Argentina was one of the wealthiest countries on Earth. I mean, a real global powerhouse. So what happened? How did all that promise lead to a century of instability? Well, let's find out. All right, so our story starts where a lot of them do, with a fight for freedom. But for Argentina, it was also a fight to figure out what the country even was. And the very first step was breaking away from a massive empire. You see, for centuries, Argentina was just this distant outpost of the Spanish Empire. But then, when Napoleon's invasion of Spain weakened the crown, the colonies saw their chance. The May Revolution in Buenos Aires was the spark, and by 1816, a new nation was officially born. But here's the thing. Gaining independence from Spain wasn't the end of the conflict. Not even close. It was really the beginning of a new one. The battle was no longer against a foreign king. It was against each other, brother against brother. And this slide really lays out the two competing souls of Argentina at the time. On one side, you had the Federalists. These were the rural landowners who wanted power to stay in the provinces. And on the other, you had the Unitarians, the urban elite in Buenos Aires, who wanted a strong, centralized nation. This fundamental clash, it would define the country for decades. After those civil wars finally subsided, Argentina entered this period of almost unbelievable growth and prosperity. I mean, for a moment, it really seemed destined to become one of the world's great nations. This was its golden age. So what was the engine of this boom? Well, it was people. Over 6 million immigrants, mostly from Italy and Spain, poured in, all looking for a new life. They're the ones who transformed the fertile plains into the world's breadbasket and turned Buenos Aires into this bustling, cosmopolitan metropolis that could rival Paris or London. And from this incredible melting pot of cultures, something totally unique and powerful emerged. Born in the working-class neighborhoods of Buenos Aires, the tango became the soulful expression of this new Argentina, a dance just filled with love and longing and a little bit of rebellion. But yeah, this golden age had a dark side. The progress and the prosperity that some people enjoyed was built on a foundation of violence and tragedy for others. While all those immigrants were being welcomed in Buenos Aires, a brutal military campaign known as the Conquest of the Desert was being waged in the south. The goal was to seize the vast lands of Patagonia from the indigenous peoples who had lived there for centuries. It left a deep, painful scar on the nation's conscience that honestly remains to this day. Now, the Golden Age couldn't last forever. The Great Depression came and shattered the global economy. And in all that turmoil, a figure emerged who would pretty much define Argentina for the rest of the 20th century: Juan Domingo Perón. Perón, along with his absolutely magnetic wife Eva, or Evita as everyone knew her, completely reshaped Argentine politics. They championed the working class, the descamisados, or shirtless ones. He raised wages, he empowered unions, and he gave a sense of dignity to millions who felt like they'd been ignored by the elite. Peronism became a political force unlike anything else. And the Perón era was just a whirlwind. I mean, look at this. His rise was meteoric, and Evita's tragic death cemented her as a national icon. But his growing authoritarianism led to a military coup, forcing him into exile for nearly 2 decades, only for him to make this triumphant return in 1973. It was just a perfect storm of hope, tragedy, and political drama. Perón's death left a huge power vacuum, and the country just descended into chaos. This instability set the stage for the absolute darkest chapter in its modern history. It was Argentina's most profound fall, but, and this is so important, it also gave rise to one of the most powerful human rights movements the world has ever seen. So, in 1976, a military junta took control. They promised to restore order through what they called the process of national reorganization. In reality, it was a campaign of state-sponsored terror that plunged the country into a period of fear and silence, known as the Dirty War. 30,000. Just let that number sink in for a second. That's the estimated number of students, activists, artists, unionists who were systematically kidnapped, tortured, and murdered by the regime. They became known as the Disappeared. But out of this darkness, an incredible light emerged. The mothers of the Plaza de Mayo, mothers of the Disappeared. They began to march silently in front of the presidential palace every single Thursday. Wearing simple white headscarves, they became a global symbol of courage and a defiant demand for truth and for justice. The dictatorship eventually collapsed after a humiliating defeat in the Falklands War, and democracy returned in 1983. But that cycle of boom and bust, of hope and crisis, it was far from over. It continues to define Argentina to this very day. You can see the pattern so clearly, can't you? The return of democracy brought hope, sure, but not stability. Then, the free market reforms of the 90s led to a brief boom, but also soaring debt. This created a bubble that just burst spectacularly in 2001, when the country literally went bankrupt. And ever since then, it's been this constant roller coaster of recovery and crisis, a modern echo of a century of instability. And yet, despite all the political turmoil and the economic hardship, the spirit of Argentina, it remains unbreakable. Its true wealth, you could argue, lies in its culture. This is the land of the tango's passion, of Che's revolutionary fire, and of the divine genius of football legends like Maradona and Messi. These are the icons that really carry the nation's soul. Which leaves us with this one final thought. Argentina's history is a complete paradox. It's a story of failure, absolutely, but it's also a story of incredible creativity and survival. And it forces us to ask, what is that fire within a people, that collective memory, that allows them to endure so much and still rise again and again, to dance, to dream, and to fight for their soul?